327 BCE, Aornos. Alexander has reached the mountains before India. Behind him lie the ruins of the Persian Empire, the long war in Sogdiana, the death of Darius, and years of marching farther east than any Macedonian army had ever imagined. But before he can reach the great rivers of India, before he can face King Porus and the war elephants at the Hydaspes, one fortress blocks the road. Aornos, a massive mountain stronghold rising above the lands near the Indus. To the people of the region, it is more than a defensive position. It is a refuge where soldiers, civilians, and local fighters can gather when everything below has fallen. To Alexander, it is a problem he cannot leave behind. The rock is high, the slopes are steep, the approaches are difficult, and normal assault looks almost impossible. Ancient writers later connected the place with legend, claiming even Hercules had failed to take it. Whether that story was history, myth, or propaganda, Alexander understood its power. If he captured Aornos, he would not only clear the road, he would defeat a symbol. If he ignored it, enemies could sit behind him in the mountains while he marched toward the Indus. If he attacked and failed, every tribe and hill fortress ahead would learn that Alexander could still be stopped. So he chose the only answer that matched his reputation. He would take the rock. By the end of this siege, Alexander will climb where armies were not supposed to climb, use engineers where brute force is useless, seize the surrounding heights, and turn a fortress of legend into another warning on the road to India. This is the Siege of Aornos. To understand why it mattered, we need to understand where Alexander was in 327 BCE. The Persian Empire had already fallen, but Alexander's war had not ended at Persepolis or even with the death of Darius. The farther he moved east, the less the campaign looked like the great battles of the early years. There were no more easy capitals, no single king waiting on a plain, no one battle that could decide everything. Instead, Alexander faced mountain tribes, local rulers, fortified settlements, river crossings, narrow valleys, and enemies who knew the land better than he did. In Bactria and Sogdiana, he had learned the cost of holding an empire. Now he was moving toward India, and the road was dangerous. Resistance in the region was fierce. Fortresses such as Massaga had already shown that local defenders could fight brutally and delay the advance. Alexander could not afford to leave strongholds untouched behind him. Every fortress left unconquered was a threat to supply lines, communications, and morale. Aornos was different because of its position and reputation. It dominated the surrounding country. It offered safety to those fleeing Macedonian advance, and it stood like a final challenge before Alexander moved toward the Indus. His men had already seen him do the impossible. At Tyre, he built a road through the sea. At the Persian Gate, he reversed a mountain ambush. At the Jaxartes, he forced nomad horse archers into battle. Now the question was different. How do you take a fortress when the fortress is the mountain itself? Alexander first needed information. The site could not be rushed blindly. Its cliffs, paths, nearby hills, and defensive positions had to be understood. Ancient accounts mention local guides helping the Macedonians identify approaches around the rock. Whether they came willingly or under pressure, their knowledge mattered. This was not a battlefield where cavalry could decide the outcome in one charge. This was a siege of terrain. Alexander had to isolate the fortress, control the nearby heights, and create a way to bring pressure against a position nature had already fortified. The first key was a neighboring height. A direct attack against the main rock would be extremely costly, but if Macedonian troops could seize a position near it, they could threaten the defenders from above and from the side. Alexander sent a detachment to occupy a nearby spur. Ancient tradition connects this operation with Ptolemy, one of his trusted commanders. The move was dangerous. A force on the heights could be cut off before the main army arrived. The defenders understood the danger and attacked. If they drove the Macedonians off that position, Alexander's siege would stall before it truly began. Fighting broke out on the rough ground. The Macedonian detachment held long enough for Alexander to bring support. Once the nearby height was secured, the siege changed shape. Aornos was no longer an unreachable rock staring down at an army below. Now Alexander had a foothold. But a foothold was not enough. Between the Macedonian position and the fortress lay difficult ground, including a ravine or gap that made a direct approach almost impossible. So Alexander turned again to engineering. His men began building. Timber, stone, earth, and brush were dragged into place to create an approach across the broken ground. It was brutal labor under danger from above. The defenders could see what was happening. Every meter of progress made the fortress less secure. This was the same logic Alexander had used before. If the sea blocked him at Tyre, he built into the sea. If Gaza stood too high, he raised the ground. If Aornos stood beyond a ravine, he would fill the gap. The defenders resisted. They launched attacks and tried to disrupt the work. They knew that once Alexander's approach reached a certain point, the rock would no longer feel invincible. The struggle became a race. Could the defenders break the Macedonian foothold before the engineers brought the assault close enough? Or would Alexander slowly turn impossible terrain into a road? Day by day, the Macedonians advanced their works. The men were exhausted, but every soldier understood the story. This was the rock even heroes were said to have failed against. If they took it, they would prove that nothing on the road ahead was beyond them. Alexander understood the psychological battlefield as well as the physical one. Aornos was not only about a fortress, it was about reputation before the Indian campaign. If local rulers heard that the rock had fallen, many would think twice before trusting walls, cliffs, or legends. The defenders also understood the meaning of the siege. They could see the Macedonians getting closer. They could see the surrounding positions falling under Alexander's control. At some point, the fortress that had seemed like shelter began to feel like a trap. Ancient accounts say the defenders eventually tried to negotiate or appeared ready to surrender, but also attempted to abandon the position during the night. Alexander did not allow them to escape cleanly. When the defenders began withdrawing, Macedonian forces struck. The retreat became chaos. Some defenders were killed in the escape. Others fled into the difficult terrain. The position they had trusted was lost. Then Alexander occupied the rock. Aornos had fallen. The fortress that had seemed unreachable was now in Macedonian hands. For Alexander, the victory was exactly what he needed. It cleared a dangerous stronghold from his rear. It secured the route toward the Indus. It gave the army another story of impossible success. And it sent a message through the region. Mountains could fall. Rocks could fall. Places protected by legend could fall. This was not the largest siege of Alexander's career. It was not as famous as Tyre. It was not as politically symbolic as Persepolis. It was not as tactically dramatic as Gaugamela. But Aornos shows something crucial about the later Alexander. By 327 BCE, he was no longer only the young king who won battles by charging at the decisive point. He had become a commander who solved every kind of problem. Cities, rivers, mountains, nomads, fortresses. Every enemy tried to change the battlefield against him. Alexander answered by changing it again. At Aornos, he did not win because the rock was easy. He won because he refused to accept what the terrain seemed to say. The mountains said no army could approach. He seized the nearby heights. The ravine said no road existed. He built one. The defenders trusted distance, cliffs, and reputation. Alexander turned all three against them. And when the siege ended, the road east opened wider. The army was now moving toward the Indus and beyond it, toward the greatest unknown of the campaign. India was not Persia. Its kings commanded armies Alexander had not yet faced. Its rivers were wide and dangerous.
Its elephants could terrify horses and break formations. Aornos was the last great mountain challenge before the river war ahead. After taking the rock, Alexander crossed deeper into the lands beyond the old Persian frontier. Alliances were made, cities submitted, others resisted. The campaign moved toward the Hydaspes, and there, on the far bank of a swollen river, stood King Porus, not hiding on a mountain, not escaping into the steppe, waiting with infantry, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants. At Aornos, Alexander had defeated height. At the Hydaspes, he would have to defeat water, weather, and elephants in the same battle. And for the first time in years, his army would face an enemy who did not run from the decisive fight.